May I have a nomination for chair for the duration of this meeting?
Can I nominate Councillor Chauhan, please?
Seconded.
Okay. So we will need to take a vote. If board members can indicate whether they are for, against or abstaining, please. I will read out board members' names. Councillor Chauhan.
Agreed.
Councillor Fielding.
For. Agreed.
Councillor Moores.
Agreed.
Bengal Brave.
Agreed.
Majid Hussain.
Agreed.
And Dr. Ian Milnes.
Agreed.
Thank you. Could I pass over to the chair now?
Thank you. Good afternoon and welcome to this virtual meeting of the Commissioning Partnership Board held by the virtue of regulations which have temporarily removed the legal requirement for local authorities to hold public meetings in person. The requirement for public meetings to be made accessible to the public remains, and the link to the virtual meeting is available on the Council's website in the usual live meeting link page. This enables the Council and partners to make effective and transparent decisions on the delivery of services for residents. If a connection to a member is lost during this meeting, the meeting will be stopped to enable the connection to be restored. If the connection cannot be restored within a reasonable time, the meeting will proceed, but the member who was disconnected will not be able to vote on the matter under discussion as they would not have heard all the facts. Should any aspect of external link fail, a short adjournment may be called for up to 5 minutes or so to determine whether the connection can quickly be reestablished, either by video or telephone. In the alternative, if the connection is not restored within the time, the meeting will be adjourned and any further business will not proceed until another time and date. Firstly, can I ask the clerk to ask the members to confirm their attendance?
Councillor Chauhan.
Present.
Councillor Fielding.
Present.
Councillor Moores.
Present.
Bengal Brave.
Present.
Majid Hussain.
Present.
And Dr. Ian Milnes.
Present. We also have officers in attendance from the Council and the Clinical Commissioning Group. When the board comes to take a vote on the report for approval, each member will be individually asked to state whether they are for, against, or abstaining. When a report is for noting, it will be asked for members does not agree. As with ordinary commissioning partnership meetings, once the exclusion of the press and public has been moved at the meeting to enable the board to discuss private reports, the press and public will no longer be able to view the meeting. If we can turn now to agenda, and for the benefit of those members of the public watching, the full agenda pack is available on the Council's website. Before we start the business of the meeting, can I advise that we will consider item 8, the revised section 75 agreement, in advance of item 7. Item 2, do we have any apologies for absence?
From members, we received apologies from Councillor Shah and Dr. Patterson, and from officers, we received apologies from Carolyn Wilkins, Helen Lockwood, and Dr. Gopi Mudir.
Thank you. Do we have any urgent business?
There are no items of urgent business, Chair.
Do members wish to make any declaration of interest? Item 6, members have before them the minutes of the last meeting held on 25th of February 2021. Are these agreed as an accurate record? Does anyone not agree? Take silence has been agreed. Thank you very much. As I indicated previously, if we now move to item 8, the 2021 revised section 75 agreement, may I ask Anne Rhines to introduce the report, please?
Thank you, Chair. So this report follows up the paper that was presented at the last CPB meeting, which discussed the updating of the Section 75 agreement for 2021. So, as advised last time, the presentation of the revised agreement at this meeting, the last one in the financial year, enables us to include the most up-to-date financial position from both the Council and the CCB perspective. And clearly, given that we are in an unusual year, there has been a lot of change from a financial perspective. The actual Section 75 agreement is appended to the report, and it has been refreshed and incorporates Schedule 8, which sets out the updated budgets, and there's a revised total budget of £170.8 million included within Schedule 8. The major change to the actual document itself is the addition of Schedule 1 Scheme D, which is COVID-19 Hospital Discharge Fund. And that has been required clearly because we're in the middle of a pandemic, and it relates to the inclusion of funding that has been made available by the NHS England to support the costs of discharging patients from hospitals as quickly as possible. And the council has incurred costs which have been reimbursed via the CCG at a total cost of £10.9 million. One of the key things that is an influence on the document and the report is the revised NHS funding arrangements in this year. So what I will do is I'll pass over to my colleague Ben Galbraith, who will explain the issues in relation to the NHS funding regime and how that impacts on the Section 75 agreement.
Thanks, Anne. So the budget regime this year has been very unusual. The first 6 months certainly much more generous than usual in terms of a topping up expenditure, allocations back to the level of expenditure incurred. However, I think, and I will say this again later on in the report, it's important to note that whilst we have had a very generous year in many respects this year, that's been hiding the underlying gap. So we still have collectively an underlying financial gap across the system of approximately £90 million. That's CCG, Oldham Hospital, Oldham CCG and Pennine Care as the large organisations. We've the new pooled fund, which has, as Anne says, is handling the hospital discharge funding. That's been very important this year. The bit I more wanted to concentrate on was section 2.9 onwards, around the additional contribution from the CCG. So what we're seeking confirmation of at this meeting is that the CCG will contribute non-recurrently over £16.5 million extra into the fund this year. I think it's important, and this is the comments I made earlier, important to understand that in accounting terms, this is permissible. It is not about matching particular items of expenditure. It is about making additional contributions. The CCG is permitted to spend money on any area of pooled funds. So the CCG could, were it so minded, and if it had the spare financial headroom, which it clearly doesn't, could contribute the whole of the adult social care budget. Clearly, that's not something the CCG is in a position to do. However, all of that funding is permissible for CCG expenditure. And it's important to understand the disconnect between the expenditure items and the contribution. So the CCG is permitted to spend money on adult social care. That's really allowable spend, 2.9 to 2.12. It's permissible under the Section 75 document. So the legal document that's appended, that I appreciate members will not necessarily have had a chance to go through in detail, but that's very similar to last year's. And it particularly sets out the ability of each partner to vary their contributions according to situation, according to need, and to help us to drive the integrated work together. So it sets out that it is permitted under the legal document. And in particular, in the Appendix 1, there is some confirmation of that from our lawyers, setting out that yes, it is permitted, and yes, our legal Section 75 documentation does allow for it. The expenditure happened in this year, seemingly trivial point, but obviously the audit is keen to make sure that we're funding money that was funding expenditure that was incurred in this year, and that we've given authority this year. So meeting on the 25th of March, we are approving the document within the financial year. So apologies for dragging us into those technicalities, but some key points. They are technical, but they're also important. They're about us saying we have one pool of funds and we decide collectively how to spend it. So I want to set it out. There's a bit there, section 3, on rationale for contribution. I think I would be remiss to say that we don't have pressures in the system. We've noted the 90 million gap overall, and we recognise that all organisations are under a lot of financial pressure at the moment. Just a few points I just want to go back over just for the minutes. So to note that we've, as a committee, received the reports on the Section 75. We've had a chance to review these in advance of the meeting. They reflect minor changes since last year's legal document, reflecting clarifications and legislative changes. So there are updates in there around Brexit and around some information governance points. We've noted the legal governance which is set out as a legal principle, the ability of CCGs to vary contributions, and we agreed that to promote joint working and a flexible approach to service delivery, that we support the principle and agree that this is explicitly set out in the Section 75 agreement. So within Section 10 of the 75 agreement is explicit wording around ability to vary contributions. We've noted the legal advice about the types of expenditure that can be pulled and that adult social care is included, and that for the last several years, the whole of the OMBC adult social care has been included. We note that it's permitted expenditure for the CCG and that the expenditure has taken place in the year. And finally, that we support the increased contributions from the CCG into the pooled fund, noting under the current NHS finance regime, these are system funds, and the use of these funds has been discussed and agreed both with Greater Manchester and North West System Leeds. There are a significant number of recommendations there, so I'll let any comments come through and then we can go through those at some point if you like, Chair. Thank you.
Thanks, Ben. I have indication from Mike Barker to speak. If you want to speak, please indicate in your chat box or using your hand function. Mike?
Thank you very much, Chair. I'm just conscious of some of the things that Ben just said, and I just kind of want to alleviate what I think may well be some people's concerned looking faces, especially at this time of year. £90 million, it would come to fruition if nobody did anything. So, of course, we clearly know the council has almost completed, if not completed now, its full financial planning round and has a consulted on financial plan for the year ahead. And we all know what that number is. The same rules apply in the health service. So when you add all of those organisations up together, if they did nothing, had no mitigations in place and no savings in place to bring their budgets back down into a realistic position, then that would be the problem that Oldham faces. So I think it's particularly important that everybody hears that, particularly our elected members who've just been through a consultation process and signed off their budget and savings plans for the year that starts in about 6 or 7 days, particularly today, given where we are in the current electoral year and what that will mean. So I think that's quite an important thing to clear off. The other thing I would strongly urge the committee to acknowledge and understand is that this, I think, is a very specific and purposeful way of making sure that we generate the benefits required and envisaged by working together in an integrated way. Our objective must be to make sure that we retain as much of the money as we possibly can to be spent and delivered in Oldham, and by making sure that we can move money around the system in a particular way, we do that. This paper puts forward a recommendation to do that. I'm also particularly pleased that the local authority bridged across last year with the CCG and increased its pot by £5.9 million, and it's good to see the CCG putting that £5.9 million back, and also putting some additional money that we firmly use for transformation money on the other side of things. So whilst this is a very technical paper, I don't want people getting lost in the jargon of it. There is something quite significant about a planning gap versus a real gap. They're not the same thing, and there's something quite significant about making sure that we retain as much flexibility and control of our resources in Oldham as we possibly can. This paper engineers both of those things to my mind, and I would largely and highly commit it and recommend it to the board today.
Thank you very much, Mike. And it's good to see that last year one part of the system was helping other part of the system, and this year that's been done again from the different part of the system, and that's the approach we want to develop in Oldham, working as integrated organizations in a truly integrated way, where eventually our residents benefit from our integrated services and our integrated approach. I appreciate that paper was circulating, and I anticipate that everyone has read the paper. So if I could ask colleagues here that whether there are recommendations which include approval of revised Section 75 agreement and other matters as set out in the report, if they're willing to move that.
Agreed.
Someone needs to move and second it.
Moved, Chair.
I'll second it, Chair.
Thank you. We will need to take vote if board members can indicate whether they are for, against, or abstain, please. I will ask the clerk to add our board members' names.
Councillor Chowan,
Agreed.
Councillor Fielding,
4. Agreed.
Councillor Moores,
Agreed.
Ben Galbraith,
Agreed.
Majid Hussain,
Agreed.
and Dr. Ian Milnes.
Agreed.
That's unanimous.
Thank you very much. That is agreed, and I hope that we will see more and more and more of that integration, financial and real integration as well in the future. Moving back to consider item 7, the section 75 month 8 and 9 position report. May I ask Anne to introduce the report?
Yes, thank you, Chair. So this is the combined month 8 and 9 section 75 monitoring position. Now, we would normally have presented the reports separately, month 8 at an earlier meeting of the board. However, we've run a little behind because of the constantly changing financial environment that we're operating in this year. So this is the combined paper at the last meeting of the financial year. The report has been prepared on the basis that members would have already agreed the revised Section 75 agreement, so we somewhat anticipated your decision, and therefore the figures included in it relate back to the £180.7 million revised budget arrangements that were included in the previous paper. So I think members of the board are familiar with the style and of the report, and so I'll just highlight the main issues. So tables 1 and 2 show the revised budget position and the anticipated variances at both months 8 and 9, and the detailed position is shown in Appendix 1. So month 8 was projecting an overarching spend of 182.1, which was a variance of £1.4 million, and month 9 was projecting a spend of 183.1, which is a variance of £2.4 million. So just focusing on month 9, which is clearly the projected outturn position, as you'll see from the figures, most of the variance sits within the council. And this is mainly due to pressures within community care placements linked to people with learning disability and poor mental health. However, what is important to note is that the variance within the council is offset within the council's own budget and accounts with areas which are not included within the Section 75 agreement. So that removes the variance and removes any risk to the overarching health and social care position. The CCG position is clearly influenced by the issues we've just been discussing on the previous paper and the revised financial environment. So as you can see, there is a very small positive variance in relation to the CCG. Just with regard to the figures within the community health and adult social care position for the council, clearly the costs of COVID are included within the figures. So we have over £16.8 million at month 9, a good proportion of which, £10.9 million, is linked to the hospital discharge programme that we discussed in the previous paper. Another important point to note is that the council is receiving funding from the government separately, and the way that the budget has been managed within the council with regard to COVID is that all the centrally unring-fenced funding has been held in one place. So it's not offsetting against the community health and adult social care budget, but in overarching terms, the council's position is offset by the tune of £26 million across the entire council. So you can see that a good proportion of that would be offset against the figures that we see in this report if they were included. The recommendation is to note the position, but I'm happy to take any questions, and I'm sure Ben would be with regard to the CCG position. Thank you.
Thank you, Anne. Does anyone have any questions, observations? Okay, thank you very much. This report was for the noting purposes. Can we agree that? Does anyone disagree? Take silence as agreed. Okay, the report is noted. The next item on agenda is Transformation Fund 2021 update. May I ask Ben to introduce this report?
Thank you, Chair. So it is a brief update on the Transformation Fund this year. 2020-21 financial year we're just finishing should have been the final year of the £450 million Greater Manchester Transformation Fund. Clearly, because of COVID, it's been a very unusual year. So those things that were up and running were permitted to continue, but where we had intention back a year ago to be expanding some schemes and starting some new schemes, that's not been permitted under the NHS command and control regime. So the report here gives an update of where we are as we come to what should be the end of the programme. Happily, Greater Manchester have managed to get some further funding out of NHS England, and we have got confirmation that £5 million of funding will be available next year for Oldham. What's set out in the report is the run rate of current schemes, were they to continue for the full year. So in that there is £3.2 million of locality schemes and a further £1.3 million of Greater Manchester funded mental health schemes. That final 1.3 is unclear how that's being funded next year, so we are pushing Greater Manchester to confirm that they will continue to fund those schemes over the coming 6 to 12 months. However, given that NHS England Board are only meeting today to confirm the overall allocation, then those elements of funding, significant that they are still not confirmed. At the moment, therefore, we have £3.2 million of schemes in flight, and we have £5 million of funding available, which will see us therefore through the year. However, I think the report also goes back over some of the history, reflecting on the speed at which we had to act to get some of these schemes up and running in the early days of Transformation Fund, and recognising that because of the pressure from Greater Manchester, the delays in Greater Manchester approving the initial allocation of 21.3, and then subsequently the pressure on Oldham to deploy those funds, it meant that some of the schemes were started without detailed metrics being in place and without a baseline for those metrics being in place. That's made evaluation of those schemes difficult over the period, and it's making it difficult to consider how we should be taking those schemes forward in the future. The report doesn't try to do that evaluation at the moment. It notes that we are in the position that we're at, that we've got a number of gaps, and suggests that that work be done over the coming months, effectively during PERDA behind the scenes, and that we bring those conversations back to this group in realistically July or so, with a view of which schemes are working, and some of that will be relatively soft evaluation rather than perhaps as hard numeric as we would like it. However, so the recommendation on the paper is to note the contents of the report and agree that a review be undertaken for schemes requiring continued funding, being done as part of the system-wide budget setting process, reflecting, as Mike said, that the delays in the approval of NHS funding means that NHS organisations are only just starting that detailed budget setting now. Although that is, I agree. Thank you, Chair. Take any questions.
Thanks, Ben. Any questions, observations? Pretty self-explanatory. Okay, thank you. Is that moved then? Can someone move it, please?
Move, Chair.
Second.
Thank you. We will need to take vote. If board members can indicate whether they are for, against, or abstain, I will ask clerk to read out board member names, please.
Councillor Chowan,
Agreed.
Councillor Fielding,
Agreed.
Councillor Moores,
Agreed.
Ben Galbraith,
Agreed.
Majid Hussain,
Agreed.
Dr. Ian Milnes.
Agreed.
That's unanimous.
Thank you. That is agreed. Our next item is Thriving Communities Programme funding. May I ask Rebecca Sutcliffe to introduce the report, please?
Hi, everybody. Good to see you all. So this paper relates to funding that's already been approved by this board as part of the Thriving Communities business case that came through the board some time ago. The reason that it is here today is because the financial environment in which we find ourselves has changed in the intervening period, and the transformation funding that was approved through the business case is now at risk. So we need to come back to board to seek to request, and the recommendation is that the funding is committed for this programme for 21-22 in order that we can honour the commitment that's already been made through the business case. As the paper describes, the Thriving Communities programme is made up of a wider range of activity than is the subject of this specific request. So, as you'll all be aware, social prescribing is a central element of the Thriving Communities programme, and as such is an essential and agreed element of the model of delivery that was approved through the locality plan as part of our early intervention and prevention offer. The social prescribing contract in itself for 21-22 will be funded through Council Thriving Communities Reserve, so that doesn't form part of this ask, but it's an important context because all of the other things relate to and act in support of that social prescribing contract, which has been approved through until the end of March 2022. So the request for funding in this paper relates to the Social Action Fund, which includes a number of pieces of work and voluntary and community sector activity, which are described in detail in the report, that amount to 317,000. There's a request for some funding for staffing, and also the evaluation that has already commenced, which will form an important part of the programme, so that we are able to comprehensively describe the impact of all of the Thriving Communities programme. I think the only other thing that I'll mention before I open up to questions, and Rachel, who is the author of the report, is here as well, should we want to draw upon her understanding, is that beyond the life of this programme, we are currently doing a piece of work more broadly around early intervention and prevention to describe the entirety of our preventative offer as a health and care system, with a view to working through together what are the things that we want to invest in a sustainable way beyond the life of this programme, and informed, importantly, by the evaluation that we are now in the process of undertaking. We have within the locality plan a clear articulation of our ambition around early intervention and prevention, but I think we recognise there is more work to do to draw together all of those different strands, so that we've got that real coherence about what our early intervention and prevention offer is as a health and care system, but actually importantly as a wider public service system. And of course the experience of COVID has really helped us as well, and the learning from COVID will inform that piece of work too. So just to summarise before I open up, what this ask is for a total of 410,000 of funding for some elements of the Thriving Communities programme that have already been approved through the business case for 21-22, and that during the course of that year we will be doing a piece of work to work through and bring back to this board proposals around the longer term offer for early intervention and prevention.
Thanks, Rebecca. Very helpful. So it's Oldham's locality approach, and we need to, as a system, decide where do we want to spend our money. Do we want to spend money of getting people out of the hospitals, or preventing them first to get ill or get into the hospital? Obviously, it makes sense to invest on resources in a system-wide approach where we prevent things rather than building up crises and then trying to resolve them. And we've been having those discussions with Rebecca, with Mike and other colleagues, and saying, what do we need to do? And it's probably difficult to work in isolation in health and social care because everything is so closely linked, whether it's housing, whether it's schooling, whether it's children. So that's why system-wide approach is needed. But what also really important when we're looking at the future is say, how do we set up clear KPIs or indicators to measure our performance, is saying where we're spending the money, what outcome is delivering for the wider system, where we can measure the outcome for the wider system, not only for that part of the system. And I'm hoping this paper and the work which Rebecca is leading on in the future with wider approach, locality approach in Oldham will help us to achieve some of those outcomes. Mike, do you want to come in?
Just to endorse everything you said, Chair, thank you. And again, another paper that I absolutely strongly commit to and urge this board to do the same this afternoon. We have for quite a long time got a reasonably dominated acute type of setup as our model of care without things like thriving communities and the work that Rebecca's doing around early intervention prevention. I think we'll miss a great deal of opportunities. So we are in the foothills, I think, of some quite exciting things to come over the next couple of years as we bring more and more services into a more integrated space focused on keeping people well, helping people to keep themselves well, rather than needing expensive acute hospital care as their first port of call. A thriving community is one of the best things I've seen for some time, so I totally recommend this. I think it's a technical piece of paper for me this afternoon, where we're just simply committing to a direction of travel that we're already on. So great work to Rachel Dyson and the team, and a whole load of other people with Nicola Hepburn and co. So thanks, Rebecca, for bringing it forward for us.
Absolutely, and thank you to all your team. So if you don't have any other questions, observations, the recommendation to continue with committed expenditure is set out in the report. Is that moved?
Moved.
Seconded?
Second.
Thank you. We will need to take vote now.
Councillor Chowan,
Agreed?
Councillor Fielding,
Agreed.
Councillor Moores,
Agreed.
Ben Galbraith,
Agreed.
Majid Hussain,
Agreed.
and Dr. Ian Milnes.
Agreed.
It's unanimous.
Thank you. That's agreed. My understanding is that concludes this meeting of the board. Is that correct? Okay. We don't have any other business being notified of. Thank you very much and enjoy the rest of your day.
Thank you. See you soon.